I was challenged by viewer MagicGimp to get the Logitech G13 working in Linux. So I did. If you want to know how I got there and what a G13 actually is, well, stay tuned and welcome to our eclectic hodgepodge of video. You know, the kind the algorithm apparently can't really deal with. But who cares? We'll have an unboxing for all of the people out there who don't know what a Logitech G13 actually is. Part 2 will be the story how I got lost in the AI spiral of death. And 3, how I finally got it to work, and then the nerdy stuff at the end with code and commands and so forth. But I do provide convenient chapters, so you can just skip the bits you don't really care about. And if you really don't give a toss about this story, just grab the driver package from GitHub and maybe watch my how to install the G13 video. Links are in the description below.
Okay, let's see what we have here. Logitech G13 gaming pad. Game-changing comfort and control. The last time I used that thing was when I played World of Warcraft. And I think that was right around the time of the first expansion. Oh yeah, 2010, Logitech, whatever. Oh, it's compatible with Windows 7. Too bad I was trying to use it on Linux. 15 years after that thing came out, apparently. And yes, this is mine from way back when. Let's see what we got here in here. No idea what's on here, because that's definitely a CD I made. We have the quick start guide, also probably relatively useless when we use that thing in Linux. Lots of important information in a lot of languages. Flyer for Playseat by Logitech. Yeah, I guess that was a thing. Playseat.com. And Logitech.com, I think. You can send in your what you think about this product. And a wire. Pretty nice packaging, to be quite honest. And this thing on its own, to clean it a bit. It's quite nice. That little. It's also quite heavy. This is actually metal. These rubber pads are very sticky. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's, yep, not really going much anywhere. I can't remember how to use that thing anymore, but you had like different memory base for different games or for different characters in games, and the LCD up there, and this was, I think, you could program for like jump or something. You can program all those things, all those keys question is just, will that work under Linux as well?
Well, for starters, I had to check that CD, which I had stashed inside the Logitech box. And it turns out that I backed up the original drivers. Unfortunately, they're for Windows. However, they're very easy to install in Wine. Just double click and it installed it. However, the software couldn't recognize the device, the G13, when I plugged it into the USB. That has apparently something to do with the way how Wine deals with USB devices that are not keyboards or mice. But I did not know that at this point. So I thought maybe one can patch the G13's keystrokes through Wine and then output it on the other side again. So naturally, since I don't know what I'm doing, I fired up ChatGPT and explained my dilemma. Yeah, I know I could have read certain articles and I would have known by now that this is just a recipe for disaster. But I didn't. And ChatGPT, in his totally always reaffirming fashion, told me, sure, not a problem, that is totally possible. Well, what a waste of time that was. I should also probably point out that Grandma was here for several weeks, and that's why I had finally time to take the plunge into this project. So yeah, after several attempts, which were doomed from the beginning, even ChatGPT acknowledged that Wine is not the route to take. As a matter of fact, that it is a known point of failure. And that is where the AI spiraled out of control. Well, the LLM suggested certain other options, usually older, long abandoned driver packages and workarounds and God knows what else. But I tried some of them and nothing worked. So even so, the algorithm assured me that there are workarounds and we will get this done. This stupid ChatGPT is so eager to please. It's almost disgusting at times. Anyway, I searched on GitHub and the newest driver I was able to find was the one from Lord Booker. At the end, that's what I used, and then I built on top of it. Lord Booker acknowledged that he used the suggested setup in Arch Linux. I'm using Ubuntu. By the way, such endeavors are exactly where Arch Linux shines, because it is not hamstrung by opinionated dependency packaging. And yes, I am looking at you, Canonical, but I digress. So, hurdle 1 with Lord Booker's setup was how to get it working in Ubuntu 24.04. Well, I wasted some more time with that, and ChatGPT was totally out of its league, and I'm at this moment basically not even able anymore to tread water. I was already swept out to sea because I do not know my way around code or excessive terminal work. It's just not my field of expertise. But somehow I got the whole thing to work-ish. But only the pass-through function worked and the pre-programmed macros. Like you could assign print screen to, let's say, button G20. Well, that is not really functional, and that was another completely wasted day. Then I came up with the idea to create a program that would simply intercept the output from the G13 and translate it into something Linux understands, without the whole driver thing. ChatGPT once again told me that is not a problem and absolutely doable. I ended up with a watcher based on Python that really did exactly that. It watched for key presses from the G13 and translated it into something Linux readable without using Lord Booker's drivers. But the keystrokes were neither editable nor controllable via a GUI. And in order to make the user experience somewhat bearable, I really wanted to have a GUI. Trust me, I tried, and it didn't work. That was another wasted day. Well, then I had the genius idea to simply hook the G13 into KDE Plasma as an additional keyboard and let Plasma handle the key bindings, which didn't work either, even though GPT thought that would work. It didn't. Well, another day gone. At that point, I was ready to give up because that was a long-ass time. But I thought about it some more and analyzed in my head which part of the whole setup worked and what failed. So that way I was able to figure out certain things. First and foremost, the driver works. The GUI based on Java works, sort of. The key bindings do work with preset macros. So in principle it does work, but I can't edit anything. Even so, there is a macro editor, but it didn't work. ChatGPT is, as a coding tool, pretty useless when it comes to complex tasks. And number 5 is the key inputs from the G13 do work, but are somehow dodgy. Like something was just out of alignment. I didn't know. After a weekend break, I thought, let's give Anthropic's Claude a shot, which is apparently geared towards coding projects. So I gave the AI the whole rundown. I said what I want to try and that I would prefer the Lord Booker route because certain parts are already working and we could maybe improve upon it. But I wanted to do it from a clean slate, not with all these messed up, weird bits left over on my system from the previously failed attempts. Well, what shall I say? It guided me through a cleanup process and gave explanations what each step does, and then helped me to install all the needed dependencies and additional compilers to get me up and running. In comparison, that took with ChatGPT something around 4 hours to get to that point, and with Claude it took 20 minutes. I have to say that instilled a little bit of confidence back into the whole project, unlike ChatGPT's stupid false encouragements. They are not confident inspiring, they are just annoying. Well, and after several debugging sessions and changes to the GUI, like adding the Save Profile button, which was not in existence before, the Restart Driver Now function, getting the macro editor working, and create an install script that checks for your Linux distro and adjusts the dependencies accordingly and then installs everything automatically. The whole thing works. As showed at the beginning, it works. It is not exactly the same experience as the original Logitech software, I have to say that. They had all those widgets, on-screen menus, and the ability to save profiles on the device itself and then carry it to a different computer. This does not work in Linux, but it works for what I needed. As an additional keyboard for editing tasks and 3D modeling. I cannot confirm at this point if the gaming side of things actually works. And I really don't have a desire to excessively test that field either, because I don't really game much on my computer. And if you don't have the desire to listen to more detailed steps, the ones I took to get this working, you can end the video now. Everyone else, follow me to the nerd section. Well, this is the part where I now need my notes. Quite a lot of them. What can I say? I'm not a tech guy. I mentioned that several times, and often I don't know what I'm doing and I have to blindly trust the AI output or whatever I read on a forum. But with this project I noticed something. Even though I don't know my way around code very well, I do understand systems. And I do understand complex systems very well. It felt a little bit like that guy in the Matrix where he stared at a screen with the green text and he then says, at some point you actually see what the code means. This is really how this felt, because after a while I noticed when the AI went down a rabbit hole or played whack-a-mole with like tiny little sections, I said, okay, buddy, let's back up, look at the whole code instead of just tiny little snippets, and see which parts of the code in the GUI and the code of the driver are supposed to work with each other, but are maybe set to wrong presettings, whatever that is called. You know, like this is supposed to be true, but it is on one side set to false, and on the other side it has some other like dependencies it relies on to make the right call. And that actually at the end led to success. So part one, as it says here, was understanding the architecture. And that is something I needed to get used to too. This driver needs UDEF rules. So what are UDEF rules? They handle the permission for USB devices that are connected to Linux. There could be a device that you as a regular user are not allowed to use, where you need root accessibility or something like that. And this driver needs to be tied into those UDEF rules, or tied into the system via the UDEF rules, so that the regular user can actually use the Logitech G13 device. Lord Booker mentioned that in his instructions, and if one does that correctly, it actually does work. But then there was this thing, okay, let me back up. For those of you who don't know, and I certainly didn't, is Linux reads keyboard inputs via a FDEF system. So each keystroke has a certain underlying code, and then Linux knows what it's doing. And you can check that with a command that is called ftest, if I remember correctly. And when I did that, I noticed that there's something weird. I pressed G1 and it recorded G0. And that was true for certain other keys as well. So they were off by 1. Like what the 6 screen on your device says is not what it reads in the settings. And I was not aware of that at first. So when I assigned a macro, or tried to assign a macro to G1, and then I checked for the G1 output, they never lined up. But furthermore, also the list in the GUI did not really line up with what the driver expected. That was a little bit of an issue, so that needed some fixing. Oh yeah, also, you always have to save into a certain profile. And they were labeled as M1, M2, M3, M4, just like in the original software. But the bindings underneath are binding 0, binding 1, binding 3. So when I saved everything into what I thought is M1, it actually saved it into the bindings-0 file. But then when I checked what was saved, I would check the bindings-1 file, because I thought I saved into M1, not into M0. So it's quite possible that I sometimes chased ghosts that weren't even there. Also, during testing, I tried to manually, I got Claude to give me the actual code, like let's say G0 equals P, K dot 99999. That would give you a certain output. But the driver was not even able to understand that, because the driver has apparently only a valid range from 0 to 255 for key codes. So when we randomly assigned macros for testing, we might have been outside of that range processable by the driver. So therefore the testing could have brought false positives as well as false negatives. You don't really know that until you, like I said before, step back and look at both codes at the same time. Besides, most of this is actually in the README file, if you download the package from GitHub, or it is in the changelog file. I did not write those files, I have to admit, because most of the time I didn't know what I was doing. So I got Claude to track all the steps and then create those files. I then proofread them and changed certain things where I figured out that I made a mistake. So I tried my best. Oh yeah. Then there was also the problem with handling device disconnection and reconnection. If you disconnected the G13 while the driver was running, and the program would realize you disconnected it, and it pushed out an error, but it did not handle the reconnect. So the device would not be detected anymore after reconnection. So there is, let me read this. It's the lib USB interrupt transfer would return an error, but the code didn't properly handle lib USB underscore error underscore no underscore device. There were certain if-when scripts that were not handled properly, and Claude helped me to fix that. Now you can unplug and replug the device, and you don't have to go through the whole turn off the driver and then turn it back on and log out, log in, not through this entire process in order to make the whole system work. Oh yeah, the whole LCD backlight thing, that worked even with the botched ChatGPT setup. But after figuring out the whole keys off by one thing, now it actually works the way that if you assign something to M1 or profile 1 key binding 0 a certain color, and then you close the driver, you can actually then see, oh, my profile 1 is red, my profile 2 is blue, profile 3 is white, whatever. You can choose so many different colors. That makes it quite handy, because the only thing your screen actually shows is G13, and then it has color backlighting. So this way you actually know which profile you are in. That was quite handy during testing. Yeah, then there was the whole macro thing. Lord Booker mentions in his original descriptions that you can use other key binding programs. You do not have to use the GUI that is based on Java. But those ones are, I tried them, and I thought they are very unintuitive to use. Specifically since the key bindings in Linux, they are done with comma-separated sequences for essential. For example, I usually used Control A because it's easy to test, but one of the sequences that was pre-programmed was Control Alt Delete. Not really that useful in Linux, but it's a Windows thing, I guess. And that sequence goes as followed: kd.29, kd.56, kd.111, d.20, ku.111, ku.56, ku.29, d.100. And right here you will now see what that is actually broken down, what all those values mean. Quite honestly, which normal person knows that? Even if you would be okay with not using a GUI and instead just program your key bindings yourself. I mean, no offense, but a normal user? Someone who wants to play video games and use his old G13 for something, or repurpose it like me for editing? Like, I don't know those sequences. Like, how cumbersome would that be? So that's why I insisted on the macro editor to actually work in the GUI, and that making sure, and it actually did that, that's how it was set up originally, that it would print, if I press Control Alt, I don't want to see a comma sequence that's long. I want to see Control Alt pressed and released, because that's something I understand. And that actually worked at the end. Oh yeah, then the GUI. When I installed the package originally, I think I mentioned it before, I could not program my own custom macros. I could only choose some out of the preset drop-down menu. And no matter what I did, even if we inserted the macros by hand into the file, it would never properly save. Let's say you want to write into slot number 20, which is an empty slot. 0 to 15, they are pre-programmed. And then you go into 20 and you now want to program that as Control A. If now the drop-down menu was set to whatever it was before, let's say slot 8 or slot 14, because that was print screen if I remember correctly. Let's say it was slot 14, print screen. And you then manually insert into the file a new macro in slot 20, and you didn't line up the drop-down menu also to slot 20 manually, the slot 14, which it was set before, would always overwrite whatever you did. If you did it within the GUI or if you did it actually changing the file via Nano or via some other program in the terminal. It would not take it. It never stuck. And that was quite annoying, to be honest. Also, the GUI didn't have a save button. It would only save, how was that? You choose a G key, which you then want to assign to something. And then you have this checkbox where you can choose between pass-through and macro. Theoretically, when you click on macro, it should save the current preset, unlock the macro editor, and then give you a chance to overwrite whatever you did. But it didn't do that. It only saved. And it only saved every time you clicked those checkboxes. And then you had to just close the GUI and hope for the best. And that best kind of never happened, even though it was a lot of work. And I have to admit my family got a little bit impatient, which I totally understand because it was a lot of days in front of the screen and at some point I personally couldn't take it anymore. It was still very interesting. It taught me a lot, not to the point that I can now actively apply that knowledge. It's more like when you learn a new language and you're at that point where you understand common things, but when you're put on the spot to actually use them in everyday situations, you are kind of still stumped. That's how I feel with this whole terminal programming, code, nano, writing sequences, debugging process, because it's totally out of my league. It also taught me the issues with super consumer friendly or end user friendly Linux distributions, specifically Ubuntu. They have such a weird way of like just taking dependencies out or don't store the dependencies in their repositories anymore, and then you have to go and hunt for them or download them somewhere else. Like if I wouldn't have had Claude to tell me that, oh yeah, they removed it in version XYZ and you have to now get it from this ancient repository somewhere else, like I wouldn't know where to look for it. But it's nice to know that that could be an issue. And that's, once again, that's the point where Arch Linux is just, hey, you need it? Install it. If it breaks your system, your problem. Maybe we could find an approach that is somewhere in between the two, but that's a different topic. And it also definitely showed me, how do I say that? It showed me how to use AI assistants better. To identify earlier when they start spiraling out of control and just hallucinate their butts off. As well as it doesn't matter what kind of system you have, and it doesn't really matter how complex it is. It is always good advice to first get a grand overview before you focus on this one thing that doesn't work and you only look in the close proximity of that issue. If you know what I mean, right? I mean, if I have water coming out of this wall, I'm pretty sure I could put some kind of inject some kind of goop into the wall that makes it watertight, like the stuff you use for sealing up leaky basements. Better approach is probably to check where the water is actually coming from and potentially patching the leaky pipe. It's the same with computer systems. It's really not that different. At least for me, it doesn't seem that different. Like, get the overview, then you can probably already eliminate certain issues if you just put one code on one side and one on the other side and say, hey, look, this one is calling for this thing to do something, but over here in the driver, it is constantly set to false or always set to 0. So no matter what this program over here does, the driver can't read it because the sequence is just saved incorrectly. That was my adventure with the Logitech G13. And yes, I'm gonna keep the box, even though I now use the device over there on the computer. So that's gonna look funky in the background. I might need a new prop. Thanks for watching. See you next time.